Hello, and welcome back to Everyday Writers, your one-stop shop for demystifying the writing process and to help you on your journey to becoming a published author. I'm one of your hosts, Crystal McQueen.
And I'm your other host, Jordan S. Keller. Thank you for joining us on this episode, Tools for the Job, where we're going to talk about different writing programs and other resources you can use. Just a quick reminder, these are all just a few things we found success with, and that works for us, and they may not work for you, and that's totally A-okay.
All right, Jordan, let's talk about the importance of using tools that work for you. One of the things we're going to talk about is technology, and technology doesn't always work the way we want it to. So tell me a time that technology has just ruined your day.
Yep, we've all got a dreaded lost all of our files story, and the worst one to me was in high school at my home computer. And this was before I was really writing seriously, so I didn't lose much except for my very crappy Romeo and Juliet-esque retellings with high school crushes. And the computer crashed, it blue screened, I lost everything. And I remember me and my mom were about to leave to go to some family lunch, and I had to go in the bathroom and just cry it out, console myself, be like, it's okay, it's okay. And the worst of it was I had lost over 3,000 songs worth of music, and just having to track down all those CDs, all those downloads, and just re-upload everything onto my iPod at the time. So that's when I learned the importance of always backing up your files, having that terabyte, which is so easy now. Just get a 36 gigabyte flash drive, and every couple of months, back up your stuff. So I will never fear losing my stuff again. How about you?
I used to use Scrivener almost exclusively for my writing. And one of these times I had spent, 2 or 3 hours writing, and I thought it was like the best stuff I'd ever written. And Scrivener crashed. Did not save. And I tried to recreate what I have, and it just didn't come out the same way. I was just devastated. Now, when I write, I don't do the flash drive. I write in one program. I back it up in Dropbox. It's also in my Google Drive. And then even sometimes I will email it to myself. It was traumatizing enough that it completely changed the way I write.
Is it difficult for you to remember which is your master file between all of those?
No, because when I name my files, I'm really careful about naming them with versions. I look at the metadata in the file, look at the date it was saved. I'm able to see all of that stuff, so I can see which one was last.
Yeah, you mentioned Google Drive, and when I started writing more seriously, that was the software I primarily used because I could access it through my work computer, through my home computer, through my phone, and it was just super easy to always have it on me and always know it was saved somewhere else. And so if it did crash, thankfully it never crashed. So I always felt safe writing with Google Drive. It's just like Word. So all the commands were similar, all the controls were the same. The only difference was its formatting was a little off. And when I switched to Word, it was strictly because of the formatting was easier. And for some reason, writing in Word tricked my brain to being more productive. And I think that was because I couldn't tab out to let me check my email, let me watch a YouTube video. And so writing in Word for me is just very we're here in this moment. We're going to write these words. You're not leaving until you're done. But I really prefer Google Drive and then Microsoft Word just for the simplicity. It's just a blank page. You don't really have anything fancy to use. That's why I never tried Scrivener, because it just felt way over the top. I thought I'd get lost in the sauce, so to speak. What was your experience when you used Scrivener?
When I first started out, if you were a student, you could buy a lifetime membership to Scrivener for $50. It was very inexpensive. It allowed you to organize your files. It's really great for storyboarding and researching and planning out a novel. But what it's not so great at is spell checking and grammar. So there was just a lot of things about Scrivener that's really great when you're starting out. But actually, executing the work in Scrivener, I was actually copying everything in Scrivener into Word to do the grammar and spell checks and stuff like that, and then moving it back into Scrivener. And it just became so cumbersome that I only use it when I'm planning out my novel.
Mm-hmm. That little red line in Word is my lifesaver. As someone who cannot spell their way out of a wet paper bag, always being notified, hey, double check this word. So if I use Scrivener, I would be screwed.
One of the things that I discovered was Pro Writing Aid. Pro Writing Aid is like Word's grammar and spell check on steroids. It's fantastic. You can change different settings within Pro Writing Aid to reflect the type of writing that you're doing. And Pro Writing Aid will give you guidance based on the published stories in that genre. Do you use ProWriting Aid?
I do now, since you mentioned it. I mainly use it for the on steroid spelling and grammar checking, and it is so cool because Microsoft Word, it won't catch homophones where ProWriting Aid will. And it's got a lot more information on when to use semicolons versus regular colons and when you need a comma, when you don't need a comma, which is very helpful for me because I get those rules mixed up all the time.
Another thing that I really like about ProWriting Aid, this is not a pitch for people to go out and subscribe to ProWriting Aid, but I'm a wordy writer. And one of the things ProWriting Aid will point out is sticky words. So instead of saying the shirt that was blue, it would recommend maybe you should change this to the blue shirt.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I'll leave them and sometimes I won't. It's not telling me how to write, but it is giving me guidance on where I might improve something or make it flow. Sometimes it's wrong. Sometimes it's like really bad.
I've had a couple wrong ones, and I've almost wanted to email, like, I don't even know who to email, but like, hey guys, your system's a little whack. With all this digital writing aids that we have, do you ever miss handwriting and journaling?
When I first started writing, I was a teenager and I loved just going out to the woods with a notebook, whatever notebook I had left over from the school year, and I would write stories out. As an adult, when I try to write stories out to keep up with the pace of my brain, it does not work.
Mm-hmm.
I was sitting in a conference hall for my graduating summer at EKU, and we were all doing NaNoWriMo. And so I had a minimum number of words that I had to get that day, but I had no gaps in between all of these meetings. So I kept a notebook with me where I was trying to write out different scenes. And in a 2-hour lecture, I think I got 150 words.
Ooh.
Do you still use it?
So in high school, that's how I would write. And then when I go get home off the bus, I would type everything I wrote. And I miss the free writing because it just felt so intimate with your words, with your world, your characters. And now if I'm handwriting something, I'm just thinking, oh, I'm going to have to type this all out later. So I'll outline and I'll do quick character studies, freehand and notebooks, but anything larger than like 150 words, I'm definitely typing them.
In Word, it's got a dictation feature, so you can handwrite it and you don't have to retype it. You just turn on the diction and then read it and Word will type it. You'll have to fix like the punctuation and things like that. Sometimes I feel like our reliance on technology is an effect of the society that we're in. Like we don't have the patience to write slowly. We want to be able to be like, my thoughts need to be on the page as fast as I can, hence the diction software, you know?
Ooh, I'll have to try that. I use Microsoft Word's read aloud function to catch like incorrect words, if my dialogue sounds clunky, if just my sentences don't sound correct. But I never thought of doing it the reverse of it recording me. I'll have to give that a shot.
Yeah.
So speaking of technology, I feel like you're sort of our AI genius in our writing community. How's that affecting how you think of writing? Does it affect the way you think about writing?
It doesn't affect the way that I write, but it does make it easier to track down information. So generative AI is a very sticky topic. I have very strong opinions about plagiarism and using it to help in your writing or refine your writing because it's really just stealing other people's work. That's what generative AI was trained on. All of those published novels out there, everything that's out on Amazon, anything that's out online, that's what they're using to train the software. So if I ask it to write a scene for me or to improve the way I wrote something, it's basically like I'm plagiarizing.
Mm-hmm.
But there are really good ways to use generative AI that I feel like are ethical. So for example, whenever we do these podcasts, I'll ask generative AI to summarize it and give me a description for my podcast. Because this information is already going out online, I'm not giving my intellectual property to generative AI. But like if you were to take the novel that's coming out and you were like, I don't want to write the 2-page synopsis, that's so painful, and you copied all of that into generative AI, you just gave generative AI your book.
Oof.
You got to be really careful about what you put in, what you ask generative AI to give you back. The biggest thing that I use generative AI for is research. So if I'm trying to figure out how many light years it is to Proxima Centauri, I can put that into ChatGPT and it's really easy for them to give me back the information. Google has integrated ChatGPT into their search feature. So a lot of times I'll actually bypass the Chat GPT or generative AI prompt and actually go out to Google because it's going to give it to me.
I've been seeing that a lot too. People asking Google crazy questions to see what the AI will respond back with. And most of the answers you can tell when it has confused the software, because one of the examples was, how many rocks should you eat in a day? And the AI prompted back, you should eat like 2.7 rocks per day. And if you go into the source where it pulled the number from, rocks is referring to a different type of measurement for a grain. And so like, you just always got to be smart with when you get your information and make sure you check your facts.
Yes. So Jordan, we talked a lot about generative AI. Talk to me about some more old school resources. What are some of the things that you use in your writing process to help you get started and help you along the way?
Yeah. You mentioned old school. Way back in my middle school days, I'm sure everyone's familiar with the Freytag pyramid. It's that heart monitor beat looking upside down check mark. And it's a great way to kind of put your novel in perspective to a very simple outline where you have your exposition, your rising action, your climax, your resolution, and then your ending point. And so hopefully a correct Google of Freytag's pyramid will bring you up that example and that image that I am moving my hand to make. But that's a great tool to use, very old school. And some other old schools are books galore. There are so many books on how to write, and you should always read them with a bit of a grain of salt, because as we mentioned earlier, what works for you might not work for everybody else, and that's totally fine. Refuse to Be Done by Matt Bell. To break it down very simply, it's when you write, you should only have 3 drafts in mind. Your trash draft, your very basic draft. Your second draft is when you go in with an outline in mind, you do all your developmental edits, you make it into a book, you make it feel like you had everything planned out from the beginning. And that third draft, you go in with your line edits, make sure everything's concise, consistent, you have your proper grammar. And then after that, that's when you start sharing it with your alpha and your beta readers to get feedback on. And then the Emotional Thesauruses by Angela Ackerman. There's the character traits, both positive and negative. And I just picked up the Character Trauma book. And all these books are super great because it breaks down easily. Well, if your character's sad, here's some ways to convey that sadness. Or if your character has a negative trait and they're greedy, some ways that made them that way, and some ways it can showcase that within the book. And it just feels like a very cheat sheet way to be like, all right, I know I want this kind of character, but how am I going to properly convey that in a smooth setting? So I'm always using those books before I start writing. I'll sticky note all my main characters within them. Roman from Failing Gravity, he's a bit of a butthead. And so there are so many of him in the negative traits list just because that's where he kind of shines, where everyone else in the book is more on the positive side.
Do you use it throughout your writing process, or do you use it more in the earlier stages?
In the earlier stages, I'll make outlining, and then I'll reference it throughout the writing. But I tend to know exactly what I've decided to use, and then how I'm going to use it through sticky notes, highlights, and
So you talked about Refuse to Be Done, which is one of my favorites. But I think the books that I read cover to cover before I actually put real emphasis on my first novel was Save the Cat by Jessica Brody. And also, she has a productivity class on novel writing where she has like this cheat sheet of exactly how you can get words on the page every single day. Like, that's what I did. I would wake up first thing in the morning. She's like, you're not allowed to look at your phone. You go for a quick 5-minute walk. You wear the exact same clothes. If you drink something when you're writing, make sure it's the exact same thing. It's kind of like putting on a uniform. So within Save the Cat, it's basically like writing on beats. Like, it gives you an outline for books that you know to see that they all kind of hit those same beats. Another one that I read at the very beginning, and I actually read it before the Save the Cat, was Story Genius by Lisa Cron. The first part of the book is very motivational and like kind of like preparation, but she does talk about plotters versus pantsers, and how you can still use some of these scene cards and theories regardless of how you write. And so that was something that I went through at the very beginning. And I really like her method because you write the first chapter and then you write the last 2 chapters. So you know exactly how your story starts and how it ends. And then getting there in the middle, you can either do an outline and, story cards and things like that, or you can pants your way all the way to the end. But her big recommendation is never write a story where you don't know where you're going. And that doesn't apply to everybody. I know that like you like to find out where you go. But for me, it really helps. So what about you? Like what other things do you use?
It's more on the technological side. There's a website called wordhippo.com, and it's a super cool thesaurus website. And you just type in the word you're looking for, and it'll spit out like every definition of the word it knows, and then all the words that associate with that definition. So I use the word snarl so much, and I have learned so many synonyms for snarl thanks to this website. And then I also use Pinterest exclusively for writing, getting character image designs, setting image designs. So the way I use Pinterest is I'll search like swamps at sunset or swamps in the morning. It'll bring up all these super cool pictures. And if you click the pictures and find the link, it'll direct you to like informational websites or travel documentaries or just information about the city. Again, I'm just using the pictures mainly as inspiration to write because I've never seen a swamp at sunset, but I've got this huge board full of pictures so I can pull them out and describe how the sun filters through the plants and what kind of animals you're expected to see in the waters and everything. There's a ton of bloggers that will link their blogs onto Pinterest. So I might Pinterest search how to write a 4-book series, and it'll spit out all of these blog posts. A lot of them come with infographics, so I'm saving those graphics into my writing folders so that way I can access the blogs later. So Pinterest feels like my one-stop shop for all sorts of just ideas, inspiration, and then tools that link to other writers and other people who are doing what we're doing, who are sharing the skills and the craft.
Well, that makes me think of your Spotify playlist. You create one for every single book. So talk to me a little bit about that process.
So similar to how you said, sort of wear your uniform, drink your same drink. If I have a writing playlist for each project, I can associate with the sounds, with the vibes, the mood, the characters, and I can easily get into that flow state through the music. And so usually the playlist will begin when I'm in that first date stage and I'm getting to know the plot and the characters and figuring out what I want the story to be. And I'll hear songs on the radio, I'll hear songs that come up naturally on my Spotify that make me think of them. And I'll start just adding them all into a playlist. And as I'm writing, the 3 or 4 song playlist will grow into a 5 or 6 song, 7, 8 song. And by the end of the novel, I've got like a 20 something song length playlist. And it's really cool to be able to dive back in and just remember where I was at. My superhero romance trilogy, Ashes Over Avalon, if I listen to Wildfire, which is the first book in its first playlist, I'm instantly brought back to all this nostalgia feeling. I'm like, oh, Cinder and Abigail are doing XYZ while this song's playing in my head. And it's just like this movie soundtrack. And so those form very organically, where I feel like my Pinterest boards, they're very like sought after. Like, I know I want this kind of imagery in there.
Feels like you do a lot of prep work before a book. Like how long does all of that stuff take before you start actually putting the stuff on the page?
I probably, again, my first date stage, I call it, I'm probably in that for about 3 or 4 months. And then I'll write real heavy for like 4 or 6 weeks. And either the story will stick after that or it'll fleet away. And so like after those 4 or 6 weeks, I kind of realize how much did I really want to write this story versus how much did I just want to think about this story? And that kind of make or breaks. Well, like, well, that was something to think about. I'm done now. Or like, oh no, I really need to get this to the end of it.
I love that so much. I don't know if you would call it this. I have like mini affairs. Where I want to write the novel, but I will peter out on it because either I'm overwhelmed by it or I don't know where I want to go next. So the novel that I'm writing right now, I inserted intercalary chapters, which intercalary chapters are chapters that are not part of the book, but they help world build. So they're their own contained stories that apply to the world that you're in, but they don't interact with any of your main characters. They may or may not come back. And so for me, that type of novel is kind of the best of both worlds because I can write an intercalary chapter. And so I'm not really cheating.
Just a one-night stand.
But also because they're shorter pieces, I don't get distracted for too long before coming back to the original story.
That sounds like a great way to stay motivated if like you're feeling a little burnt out or overwhelmed, like you said in your main story, because you're still in the world. You're just taking a break from the current action and current events. Are these intercalary chapters something you read in another book that you took inspiration from?
I got the word intercalary from a professor in college. I was asking about the appropriateness of prologues, right? Should you have them? Should you not? Blah, blah, blah. And I was like, but there's pieces that I want to be able to tell in my story that don't really fit into the story. The main character wouldn't know that. She was like, well, yeah, I mean, you need to just use intercalary chapters. A huge portion of high schoolers had to read is The Grapes of Wrath. And so if you think about The Grapes of Wrath, and it's really following this family who's traveling to California because their land has been repossessed, but there's these chapters in between that are from a different perspective. So the one that I think of the most is the two little boys that are in the trucker stop, and they're pushing their face up against the glass because there's candy in there, but they're really hungry and they don't have money. The dad comes in and buys bread with the rest of the money that they have left. And the woman behind the counter takes pity on these two kids that never show up again, but she gives them 5-cent candies. It makes the world so visceral. And you never see them again. But that's the scene I think I remember the most from that book.
So it's really cool you're able to use things from other works of literature to expand and hone your own craft. Would you count other enjoyable books as a resource for your writing?
Absolutely. Anytime that I want to figure out how to do something, or I'm not really sure how to start, I'll use books that I'm very familiar with or books that I love to see how they did it. It's not like I'm creating a pastiche of that author, which a pastiche is writing a story in the style of somebody. So if you write a Shakespearean sonnet, you're doing a pastiche of Shakespeare. So I'm not necessarily writing the same way that they're writing, but I'm looking at like, how did you introduce the scene or things like that? But what about you? Like, how do you use your favorite authors in your own writing?
Kind of the same way. I kind of study how they're doing things that I'm struggling with at the time. So how they're introducing their characters, how much world building they're doing. There was Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros, and the way she's incorporated the world building, because there's so much you need to know to make sense of the story. I felt like it would have been difficult to do without info dumping. And she was able to weave it in pretty seamlessly with just having the main character explain it to characters who might not have known about the history, or having the main character remember it as a way of like calming down in stressful situations. One of my favorite authors had introduced a character's physical traits while in dialogue with another character. So like tucked their blonde hair behind their ear versus just stating that the character had blonde hair. So just studying things that I feel like I'm struggling with within my favorite author's works.
I think that one of the things that we all need to do is just constantly read. Like we talked about that in our last episode, and how important it is to read not only what we want to learn from, but also learning, like, don't info dump, don't explain it that way, because it's very boring.
Even though like I have my agent, I have a publishing deal, my book is out, like that doesn't mean I need to stop learning and stop perfecting. I teach Tai Chi on the side, and one of my instructors had told me early on that perfection isn't a destination. It's always a journey. Like you can never achieve it because there's never a state of it. And so I apply that to my writing too. Like I'm never going to reach perfection, and I'm never going to be perfect. I can only be achieving to get to the next higher state of my craft.
Well, I think we can't end on a better note than that. So thank you so much for letting us be part of your writing journey. And just remember, there are many different places to write, and it's okay to experiment with what works and what might not work.
Exactly. And there are so many resources to help you out, whether you want to go old school and read a couple of craft books, or you want to go new school and read some blogs, listen to some podcasts, just to figure out what works best for you, your style, and your journey. Make sure you join us next time for our episode, Writing FAQs, Popular Questions Answered, where we're going to talk about 10 of the most common questions from writers just starting out. I'm pretty sure each of us have asked these questions a couple of times. Some of these questions will include maintaining consistency in your writing, how to develop a routine, and so much more. If you have any questions or want to share your greatest loss from a computer mishap, let us know on our Facebook page, Everyday Writers. See you next time.
And don't forget, every day is a good day to write.